All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are thrilled that you are here. Do know that we have the chat open, so please let us know where you are Zooming from and your role in education. Do know that if you place things in the chat, it does default to host and panelist only. So make sure that you use that drop-down menu and change it to everyone. So we are extremely excited for everyone to join us, and we're going to jump right in and get started here. Let's see here. And I think I need to share these. Share my screen here. Okay.
Wow, we've got textbook authors. We've got high school science educators here, teachers of digital literacy and computer science. Wow, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
We have an educational researcher in the building as well. Welcome. Well, the virtual building, I guess I should say.
I knew what you meant, Brittany.
That's right. So let's jump right in. This is the webinar for our STEM-aligned media and news literacy lessons from Checkology. We want to definitely thank all of our funders who made this possible. We listened to educators. They were in need of these fantastic resources. And so we developed them free to use in the classroom. And we are joined by our special guest tonight, Melanie Tressick-King, who leads one of the lessons. So we are thrilled to have her with us tonight. I'm Shaylin Farnsworth, and I'm here with my team, Brittany and Aaron, who will introduce themselves in just a moment, Zooming live from Iowa. And the main goal of our team is to work with educators across the nation and build partnerships with districts, LEAs, and state level agencies to support news and media literacy in your district or in your state. So again, Shaylin Farnsworth, and I'm going to pass it over to Aaron.
Hi, I'm Erin Olson, and I am a Senior Manager of Education Partnerships West. I'm excited to support schools, not only West, but all over the country, utilizing our free resources. I'm a former high school English teacher, instructional coach, and tech integrationist. So I love seeing our computer science supporters in the chat. Welcome, everyone.
Brittany.
All right. Well, I am super excited to be here this evening. And I've seen that there are some other fellow Ohioans in the chat. I'm Brittany. I am joining from Cincinnati, Ohio, where it is a cold and dreary day. I am a former life science educator and science department chair. I did some district-wide work as we work to implement a new curriculum district-wide. And I'm also just really excited to be here as part of the NLP team tonight and share these awesome resources with you all. So I will pass it back to Shaylin.
Thank you so much. And of course, while you are putting your answers to the question that you see before you in the chat, why is news and media literacy important in STEM and education? We do want to take a moment not only to thank our special guest, Melanie, but to let her introduce herself. We are going to showcase the lesson where she is the subject matter expert and the leader of the learning. But Melanie, I'm going to toss it over to you. Thank you in all of your busy schedule for jumping on with us tonight. And why don't you let everyone know not only a little bit about yourself, but I think I love this connection to Iowa. And I don't think a lot of people know. And I do know we have some Iowans in the chat. So be sure to include that. Melanie?
Yeah, I am so honored to be here. Yeah, I'm actually from Western Iowa. I grew up in Logan. I graduated at 39. It was literally half my county. And so the Midwest and Iowa hold such a special place in my heart. I am in Massachusetts now, where I teach at a community college. And I noticed my students having a really difficult time understanding what science is and the difference between science and these other kinds of claims that they were seeing everywhere. And so I thought I'd develop a toolkit to help them. And, I love what the News Literacy Project does. And I'm so excited that there's now STEM lessons and that we can bring in these tools to help students understand the information that they're seeing.
Thank you so much. We are thrilled to have you join us. And before we jump into specific content and what people answered in the chat, Brittany, you pulled out this quote. You think that it holds true not only for science educators, but what we're trying to do here at NLP. Why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about this quote that you pulled out?
Absolutely. So, as other science educators have mentioned, it is extremely important that students not only understand the content, but they understand how to think critically about any science information that they're going to get from the news or media. And that this quote, which was shared by NSTA in January 2020, says just that. It says that science educators have never been as important as they are right now in this moment in history. If we're only teaching science, students of science, the content, then we failed them. Our students are consumers of so much information. It's bombarding them on social media. It's bombarding them on TV and popular culture. And it's paramount that they understand the science behind some of the information that they're encountering.
Great, thank you. So we're going to take all of those responses in the chat and we're going to share them later on our socials. So be sure to add your answer to the chat. But would also love to know, because we are curious, if this is your first exposure to News Literacy Project. So please let us know in the chat if you are a current user of Checkology, maybe you've heard of News Literacy Project but haven't dug into our programs and resources. Maybe this is your first encounter with the News Literacy Project, or maybe you are a veteran and you could be up here leading this chat with us tonight. So let us know in the chat. And Brittany and Aaron, please let me know what our audience, their familiarity with the News Literacy Project.
While we
Yeah,
have people putting that in the chat, I do want to call out a few answers that I saw to our opening question. Amy said that there's so much myth and disinformation being shared that it's really hard for our students to know what to believe, and that we want our young people to have a better world to live in. And then we had Kim say that news and media literacy is important to education because there's so much misleading work that's verging on propaganda. And that's especially important during election times. And we know that we're going into an election season. So thank you so much for those responses.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a varied group with a few people have been using it for a few years and some are new to our resources, Shaylin. So
Hey. Perfect. Well, I will condense this information knowing that not only do we have experts in the chat that can support you and provide resources, but we've linked a document with all of our resources and additional help to get you started. But a little bit about the News Literacy Project for those that are unfamiliar. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan education company, and we were founded in 2008 by Alan Miller, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. We are the only nonprofit dedicated to the teaching of news and media literacy. We're the largest, and we've been doing this the longest. All points we are extremely proud of. Started as a classroom program in DC, New York City, and Chicago. But about 5 years ago, we transformed our programs and resources to a virtual setting. And now we support educators across all 50 states and even in other countries. So here's our mission and vision. As I said, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We want to equip not only educators and students, but the general public with the necessary information, programs, resources, critical thinking skills to impact not only their scholastic, personal, professional lives, but also to make them contributing members to their communities and democracy as a whole. We want to equip those students, especially with the critical thinking skills to identify the mis and disinformation that they encounter every single day. We believe it's an integral part of American life, and we definitely believe it is a necessity and also a right for young people to be taught these skills in the classroom. That's why we're so excited to see news literacy and STEM, and these lessons were so essential and asked for by educators as yourself. So here is another point that we are passionate about. As I said, we believe it is a right for young people to have a news literacy education, because we believe that information is the basis for civic literacy, agency, and action. We know that our students are inheriting the largest, most complex information landscape in U.S. history, and not preparing them is fundamentally unfair. One thing we definitely like to point out is news literacy is a nonpartisan issue. And I love this graphic that Peter Adams always shares, talking about how information impacts our decisions and our action. And today we're going to focus on how misinformation, not only in misinformation in science, but I know, Melanie, you talk about pseudoscience a lot, how that impacts decisions, how medical misinformation impacts decisions and actions. And we're going to drill down into the sciences, because we believe that that misinformation exploits our most deeply held beliefs, values, and elicits strong emotions. And that's where I love your floater method, Melanie, that you're going to get into later, and how you approach that with students. I think it's brilliant from our discussion the other day. So what is news literacy? These are things that we constantly share. News literacy is the ability to determine what is credible and what is not credible. And as Brittany pointed out in one of the opening slides, it is also part of the sciences. And we know that science educators, as well as across disciplines, use this credibility and relevancy with the information that students are acquiring in their classrooms. We also want to make sure that our students understand that the information they're consuming is very different when you consume it from an expert, from a journalist. Those journalists follow standards just like we do in education, and they're far different than somebody blogging from their basement. And finally, when students interact with news and information in ways that promotes engaged civic participation. So that's what we believe news literacy provides the ability for students to do. So we have this great infographic up here about news literacy and what students can identify, and would love for educators to place in the chat, which ones do you currently touch upon in your classroom? Which one of these skills or concepts do you touch upon in your classroom? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Looks like we've got someone who teaches about bias, credible sources, primary purpose, someone who says that they try to touch on all of them.
Great.
That's awesome.
I see sound evidence mentioned quite often.
Great.
Oh, government students working on a paper about the First Amendment, focusing on the press. Wow.
Fantastic. Came to the right place. Like
Yes.
we have many resources for educators. All of our resources and programs are completely free. Here is a smattering of our offerings. Checkology, the SIFT, which is our weekly newsletter that is delivered to your inbox each Monday during the school year, created by Peter Adams and his team. I know Hannah was on there, and I'm sure others from NLP have joined. And they deliver not only mis and disinformation from the previous week. This week it was NyQuil chicken. Next week, I'm wondering if the sharks and the tornadoes and the hurricane might pop up into the SIF. So you'll have to make sure you register for that newsletter. We also offer professional learning, lots of free webinars, and our Newslet Camp is a fantastic way to connect with journalists across the country and listen to and talk with and interact with them and issues that are important to not only education, but to your students in classroom. We have a resource library. All of these are linked onto the document, as well as our community, building the movement here of news and media literacy across the nation. Be sure to register and join Newslet Nation to get up-to-date information when we offer professional learning, as well as resources and other incentives. But we're going to focus on Checkology. And I know, Brittany, that we are going to talk deeply about the 3 new STEM lessons with Melanie. But I did want to make sure that we introduce just a little bit of background information for Checkology for those that are new to the platform. So Checkology Virtual Classroom is a free platform that houses over 20 lessons. I'm on the educator side right here. You don't have to download any software. It is free to use. You simply create an account. The registration link is on the document, but this houses all of our lessons, as you see, from introduction to algorithms, to citizens as watchdogs, info zones, all the way down to our newest ones, the power of art, the watchdog role of editorial cartooning, and our 3 STEM lessons, making sense of data, being health informed, evaluating science-based claims. So lots of rich lessons, all taught by subject matter experts from the field that you can share with your students to enhance their news and media literacy learning. All of our lessons are set up pretty similar in fashion. They're led by a subject matter expert, short video instruction under 3 minutes or less, following best teaching and learning of multimodal practices in education, and also has a smattering of formative assessment throughout each of the lessons. So I'm going to give you just a glimpse into our newest lesson by our subject matter expert, Melanie.
Hi, my name is Melanie Tresick King, and I'm a scientist and a teacher at Massasoit Community College in Brockton, Massachusetts. I also advocate for science literacy using my website, thinkingispower.com, and on social media. And I want to start this lesson with a confession. I love science. Not just because it's cool and has given me a chance to preserve prairie ecosystems with controlled fires, and dive with sharks, and collect cool insects, but also because it's an absolutely amazing way of learning about the natural world. In fact, science stands alone in its ability to generate knowledge about observable, verifiable phenomena, or as scientists would say, empirical matters. I know science might seem like a lofty or abstract area of study, but its results are all around us.
So as you can see, we have subject matter experts that lead the learning. You are in for a great conversation later with Melanie, who is joining us here. But Melanie walks students through science-based claims and the evidence in this lesson on our platform. As I said, it has multiple formative assessments built into the learning. It's divided into chapters, short videos, again, following 2 to 3 minutes or less. Here is a quiz, a multiple choice quiz that students can take. It is auto-graded. Students are given immediate feedback. There's extended ones where there's free response. So lots of great learning on the platform, completely free to use. Other benefits, I'm sure you heard some of those science terms at the beginning from the video. Empirical, I know, was definitely one that I heard. If a student or a teacher sees a WW on the side, it means the word wall that they can expand for vocabulary enrichment and support and enhancement. We also have closed captioning for our videos, as well as speed control to support all students in learning. So I know that was a brief crash course, but I definitely want to get into the learning here, Brittany, Melanie, and Aaron. So I'm going to pass it over to you, but definitely dig into our resources. Make sure that you check out all of the links on the Google document. It will help get you started on Checkology. But let's dig into these 3 new STEM lessons, Brittany.
I was muted. That sounds great. let's begin by kind of talking about the lessons alignment to NGSS. So I'm going to ask Shaylin if you will share your screen with the slideshow once again. Yes, Katie, that word wall is amazing. It's so helpful for students with diverse needs, students who are not native English speakers will also find that the word wall is a great support for them. All right, we are ready to talk about evidence-based and standards-aligned lessons that we'll be sharing with you tonight. So, as Shaylin may have mentioned, all of our resources are aligned with English language arts, social studies, and library science standards, including the Common Core ELA standards, C3 framework for social studies, and ISTE standards. But tonight we're here to really talk about and dig into those STEM lessons. So the way that these lessons are aligned to our NGSS standards is that they help support the development of science and engineering practices that will allow students to behave authentically as scientists and engineers. And we do this by engaging them in lessons that encourage things like engaging in argument from evidence and obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information, analyzing and interpreting data, and using mathematics and computational thinking. So these are skills that we try to build in students. But in the middle and high school grades, with some of those foundations being laid in elementary school as well. And I did find a quote from the Framework for K-12 Science Information. Many science educators are familiar with this work because it forms the basis for the NGSS standards. And the parts that I really want to call out is that the knowledge and ability to detect bad science are requirements that both citizens and scientists need to make critical judgments about their work and to make evaluative judgments about the validity of science-related media reports and the implications that they might have for people's lives and society. So these skills, again, are very important for our students to develop just for survival in such a media and digital, such a digital media rich world. So at this time, I am going to invite our special guest to share a little more about the floater method, how she came up with it. We're going to talk about some strategies she uses in her instruction. But I found this quote, Melanie, that you made on your website, and I thought it really just drives home exactly what we're here to do. And it's that the student isn't simply to continue to give our students knowledge, right? We don't want to just keep pushing facts at them, right? The point is to get our students to think more and to think in better ways about the information that's being presented to them. And so Melanie argues that thinking is power. And that's actually the name of her website as well. So welcome, Melanie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor. I teach non-majors biology, or I teach non-majors science courses at a community college. And over the years, I was teaching the intro bio course that basically everybody has to take when they grow up, and, they're not going to be scientists. And I kept thinking, why do they really need to know about protein synthesis? And that stuff is really interesting. But, it occurred to me that they're going to forget everything. And they can always look it up if they need it. And the result is that we end up teaching science like it's a bunch of things we know. And the problem is when those things change, then people don't necessarily trust the process of science. And so I decided I wanted to do something different. And I came up with a course that, is designed to teach skills, not facts. So critical thinking, science literacy, information literacy. And I know for the rest of their lives, they're going to need to use evidence to make good decisions. And to do that, they needed to think better. And so, I designed the Floater Toolkit to be a starting point for how to evaluate claims. If we tell our students, this is what the process of science is, and these are the characteristics of critical thinking, and okay, now here's a claim, evaluate it. And that's really difficult to do. And so what I did instead was create a toolkit that I thought would be helpful for evaluating claims, and it is the floater method. And I think importantly, I bring in pseudoscience. And, Carl Sagan has this great quote, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but it was something to the effect of, if we teach only the findings of science, no matter how interesting they may be, without teaching them the method, then how can the average person possibly distinguish science from pseudoscience? So it's misconception-based learning, bringing in misinformation along with good science so that students can evaluate it and hopefully be equipped with the tools to make better decisions. Now, when I actually introduced the toolkit this week in my classes, I'm the third week into the semester. And I will spend this week covering the toolkit. I then teach the students how to be psychics because that's just too much fun. And so then I move on to, in the next section. So this toolkit is as much or as little as you want it to be. And I personally find that the concepts in here are each potentially so challenging that they can require a lot of further exploration. So I introduce the toolkit and then I dive more. So the next week I will go more into logical fallacies and into the kinds of biases that would cause us to not be objective when evaluating claims. And by the way, when I use the word bias here, I mean cognitive biases as opposed to the kinds of biases like racial biases or ideological biases that we might be paying attention for in the news. But this comes with the wiring. We all have them. So that's the next section. I'm going to move on to information literacy, and all semester long, I'm bringing in more and more claims for the students to evaluate. And so we do everything from, this week it's psychics, and then astrology and homeopathy and climate change denial. And with each of these, I present various forms of information, and I have the students walk through the toolkit and practice. And we dive into each section a bit more. And so hopefully by the end of the semester, I've given them something that they can take with them, that when presented with a new claim, okay, I know where to start. Can I prove this claim wrong, for example? So that's the reason I came up with it. I find that it is a really useful toolkit. I do find that with my students, at least, it does take a lot of time and practice for them to grasp. So while I introduce it in one set, we work on it all semester. And yeah, bringing in misinformation.
Great. I do have a question, and this is kind of for both Melanie and Brittany, since just last year you were in the classroom with students. Perfect. Not only posted a question, but then followed it up with, think of all the bad science information released during the pandemic. Thoughts around that, Melanie? I'll start with you first. Think about all the bad science information released during the pandemic.
I can't tell you the number of times over the past couple of years that I've thought about my students that I taught before I changed my method, because I didn't teach them about how science changes in real time. I mean, over the last couple of years, we've seen a novel virus and we've seen new vaccines, and with it, the science changes and there's been political involvement. And I don't feel like I equipped the students before the new approach to really handle the kinds of changing landscape, and how to know what to trust. I mean, it was a scary time, and we all kind of retreated into what's comfortable, which sided along with certain biases, and the result was a lot of people ended up being misled. So in real time, it was effective. It was useful for my current classes. But if I'm just being real, I kind of worry about the students that I taught before this.
Absolutely. I spent some time last year trying to really understand how students were creating these misconceptions they had about COVID, especially. And I decided to actually develop a project around the COVID vaccine and how it works, and how it relates to protein synthesis. Because in high school, we've got to keep on pace, and we have to really make sure that we're hitting all of these critical topics. And so my students actually created pieces of public health information to share with their community about how the COVID vaccine works. And I felt that that really empowered students to kind of take matters into their own hands and to share the things that they were learning in my classroom or in health class with those in their community, because they are the ones who can begin to impart this change that we need in our, in our culture. Really, it begins with the young people. So I had a great time kind of getting students to think critically about information being presented to them.
Now, ladies, I just have a question that I think participants might wonder the answer as well. For someone just starting, someone who's really wanting to dedicate time to support critical thinking, to support the ability to discern, where do you suggest a teacher begin?
That is a great question. Melanie, what have you ever had this conversation with colleagues that maybe work in other departments? How do you give them guidance about where to start, if so?
Yeah, I mean, where to start in their own classrooms, you mean?
Yes. So for example, if there was a history teacher who doesn't have a science background but really wants to help students understand some of the things they might see in the media, have you ever shared the floater toolkit with them or helped them kind of develop a method of instructing their students?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say the most important thing to start with is skepticism, and that's really the foundation of the toolkit. We won't evaluate claims if we aren't even skeptical enough to begin with to try to do so. So encouraging students to have a healthy level of skepticism. And then, so like we were talking briefly about the shark video that's going around today with the hurricane, right? So we have a new storm, and we've got a new potential source of misinformation. But again, if you just see that kind of thing coming across your feed and you don't think about it, then you're just going to believe it. So first step is, wait, does that look real? And then proceeding to, what do trustworthy sources say? And I know there's a lot of talk about post-truth these days, and I'm not really a fan of that term because I don't think it's post-truth. You all know what I'm talking about when I say that, right? This idea that we're in a society that doesn't care about truth anymore. I actually think we're in a post-trust world where what's happened is trust has been broken. And so one of the best things that I can do for students after teaching them to be skeptical is to know where knowledge lives. So the idea is that none of us are capable of knowing everything. We have to, like, human societies are successful in part because we divide and conquer, right? We can each specialize in different things. And so different segments of that society have access to different reliable sources of information. So when looking for that information, knowing where deserves my trust. And part of what's happened is trust has been broken down along various tribal lines. And it's really a shame because in that process, then we lose the ability to have meaningful conversations with each other and learn from each other and spot each other's biases and blind spots. So this is a long-winded way of saying, after skepticism, I encourage students to know where would be the best place to find that information.
Mm-hmm. That kind of and I'm sure Brittany saw this and was going to add on here, but Janae asked a question in the chat, and it kind of is aligned with that healthy skepticism. The number of experts that have been spouting theories, and particularly confusing for adults, not just students, from Christine Northrup in COVID to Andrew Wakefield in the immunizations, they just end up distrusting science in general. How do we counter that with students that just, become cynics instead of healthy skeptics?
Okay, so all of us believe in things that aren't true. In that none of us certainly have all of our beliefs that are true, which means that we are all prone to different types of misinformation. So one of the things that I do with my students that I think is really important is that I don't address a form of misinformation. Like climate change misinformation is clearly important, but by doing so, you trigger the identities of students that are prone to disbelieving climate change information. So instead of just addressing one form of misinformation, or even just two, because like in a science classroom, the other kind would be evolution. And then certainly these days, COVID. But by addressing a variety of forms of misinformation, especially starting with ones that are less triggering for students, that over time students can start to recognize that we're all prone to this, right? There's empathy for people who believe in things that are different than me, but also, you know what, they believe strange things, maybe I do too. And so in the process, hopefully trying to get them to start to separate their identity from their beliefs. Actually, this is a really important part of critical thinking, an important part of the rule of objectivity. That rule is the hardest rule for a reason. No one can fool us like we can. And so the idea is to get students to understand that we're all prone to this, and through a lot of practice with a lot of different kinds of misinformation, that over time they can recognize that they can evaluate their own beliefs, and if they're true, they will withstand the scrutiny. And if not, maybe, you know what, that's something I should let go.
And I think that's a really good general rule for dealing with misinformation in any demographic, not just students. If you want to talk with people in your family about some troublesome beliefs that they might have, you might start with things that seem kind of silly or that aren't so emotionally triggering, as Melanie said, just so that you can really get them to buy in to the idea that there's lots of misinformation out there. All right. So I think we've about covered the background information of Floater, how you developed it, Melanie, how you use it with your students. And so I'm thinking, Shaylin, maybe that this is a good time to start a deep dive into demoing the lesson that Melanie helped us create. What are you thinking?
That sounds great. So I'm
All
going to stop
right.
sharing my screen here for you. Let's see here. I have 1,000
Sounds
tabs
good.
going. Is my screen still showing or not?
It is not. We
Perfect.
are
All
all
right, great.
ready. All right. So I am going to begin by sharing my screen. And hopefully everyone is able to see that.
Looks good.
There we go. Okay, awesome. So the first thing that I really just want to share is where all of these lessons can be found. So I know Shaylin mentioned Checkology. This is our landing page, and educators of any form can find all of these lessons in our content section. And the lesson that we're going to be looking at today is first is evaluating science-based claims. I want to also call out that not only can educators preview the lessons, but if you navigate to the resources tab, and my computer is moving a little slow today, But if you navigate to the resources tab, you can find, oh, there we go, assignment guides for not just the lesson about evaluating science-based claims, but any of our lessons within Checkology. These assignment details are they are Google Docs, and so educators can make copies of them and actually turn them into study guides or assignments for their students to help provide scaffolding for them as they work through the topic. And so, as Melanie described, this lesson is about evaluating science-based claims credibility using the floater method and learning about reasons why people deny science. And so there are lesson objectives given here, grade level alignment is given. And then it gives you an estimated duration, about 60 minutes, depending on how you choose to implement this as an educator. It even gives us tidbits about what types of questions are being asked. So we are going to jump right in. And the lesson opens with a talk by Melanie, which Shaylin showed a bit of. So I chose to skip that. But I really just wanted to call out this very first question. It really gets students thinking about what questions they have about science. And I love that. I love that it activates this prior knowledge or prior questions that our students enter into the learning experience with. We then have Melanie talking about, excuse me, going into the floater method and talking about why it is necessary. She's going to talk about why people refuse to accept scientific evidence. And I am going to play just a bit of her video. So I'm going to start at the beginning. You'll see that I do have closed captioning on, which is it's an accessibility option available in all of our videos. Additionally, you can control the speed for students who might need the speed reduced. And as Shaylin mentioned, there is a word wall that is available as well. So let's listen to Melanie as she talks to us about why people resist science.
And Brittany, the sound is not transferring.
Oh no, the
That's
sound is
okay, I'm sure.
different. All
I'm
right, I
sure.
can fix that. Can you hear me now? All right, you can hear me. So let's try it again. I think I have fixed it. I think my earpiece is the problem. And I'll start again, just playing the first 20 seconds of Melanie's talk.
So why do people sometimes
Is that
doubt
better?
or refuse to accept scientific evidence? I'm not talking about the science behind airplanes or cell phones or electricity. No one really claims that scientists are wrong, lying about the science that led to these developments. There are situations where the science is just as clear, and yet people do doubt its validity and resist its findings. As I said,
so Melanie walks us through some things that are hotly debated topics in science, GMOs and climate change and vaccines. And then she talks about why there are people who are science resistors. So let's listen to what she says at 1 minute and 10 seconds in.
science on these topics. If science has such a good track record, and if virtually all scientists agree on GMOs and vaccines because the evidence is so strong, how could there still be doubt and denial? Well, experts who study resistance to science suggest that there are two main reasons. One, People often react to science in ways that are biased and resist certain findings that complicate or threaten their worldview, beliefs, or identity. And two, a lot of non-scientists misunderstand what science is and how it works, which kind of makes sense because science is complicated. Why do the recommendations and guidance of scientists sometimes conflict and sometimes change? Does absolute certainty or 100% proof exist in science? How can we know which scientific findings are credible and deserve our trust, and which we might want to stay skeptical about? What exactly is science anyway? These are all important questions that go right to the heart of how science works and what makes it reliable.
So what you'll see is that I pulled up the word wall just to show you that students can refer to this as they watch the video for, again, that vocabulary and language support that so many of our students need to help with comprehension. But you will see as you preview this lesson that Melanie then walks us through each element of the floater method. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to play each little snippet, but I do just want to show you some of the formative assessment options that are contained within that lesson. So you will see questions that ask students to sift through information and select two reasons that apply to science, to the resistance of science. You'll also see that I think you guys might be seeing yourselves on my screen. You will also see that there are some matching, so students can drag and drop. And again, things that are formative assessment based like this, that are multiple choice or auto grading, will allow students to try multiple times. So it's not just a one shot right or wrong. Students actually can try it again and again until they get it right. Another question type, when we go into scientific objectivity, students have to select the 3 that are most accurate. And this mimics what we see in standardized testing. So we see questions where students have to select from lists of answer choices. And I'm going to kind of skip ahead to Melanie's talk on the next portion. So give me just a second to skip ahead while I'm moving to the correct tab. Are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's definitely some
that you are seeing.
Yeah, Melanie, this one, a couple things. First, people want to know not only how to get in touch with you, but
Shaylin, I am not hearing you.
Oh, shoot. Can you hear me, Melanie, Aaron?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Everybody else can hear.
That's okay. People want to know how they can get in touch with you. Sylvia wants to know if she can join your class. Do you offer any adult support, adult learning? What do you have coming up for people to be involved with and connect with you? So I think that's probably one of the immediate ones. And I know that you mentioned the witch trial. I don't know if you want to comment on both of those things, Melanie.
Yeah, I can start with the witch trials because that's just more interesting. So I start every semester with witch trials. I literally, day one, actually after I do a personality assessment reading with my students where I fool them and think they got a personalized reading, it's all the same. So after that, I talk about witches and, my goal is to get students to think about what they believe and why. And in the witch trials, people were so convinced that, witches were doing these various things that they would torture and kill them. And that was often their best evidence, torturing. And so, it's far enough away. And it's, the vast majority of my students don't believe in at least that form of witchcraft, that they can more easily stand back and assess those beliefs. And of course, my goal is to get them to start to think about their own beliefs. But again, starting with these things that aren't necessarily triggering for students and how we're all prone to believing these strange things can then be a helpful interlude into the other kinds of beliefs. I then go into, by the way, it's really important, the limits of personality, the limits of perception and memory. A lot of us think that our experiences are the best way to know something. Like, I know what I saw, ghosts are real because I saw them, or like homeopathy is real because I tried it and it worked. And while those experiences may seem real to us, they may not necessarily withstand scientific scrutiny. So the limits of perception memory, or basically the limits of anecdotal evidence, is really important. Back to, so I have a website, thinkingispower.com. And again, the premise is that there's just too much for any of us to know. We have to think better. On my website, you can contact me. So please email me through the website. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. But with Thinking is Power, I tried to organize it in a way that would be useful to people. There's a foundations page, and the foundations page roughly corresponds to the sections of my course. It's still in process, so there's going to be more that's added to it. But if you are new coming to a critical thinking site and wanted to learn the basics, the foundations course is intended for you to go through those sections, like in my Science for Life course. There's also a page that's topic based, which is where I get to explore things like alternative medicine or ghosts or psychics, that kind of thing. And then there's a For Educators page. On the For Educators page, I actually include various activities and assignments I did in my class. I use a lot of what are called inoculation exercises. And if we have enough time later, we can come back to these. But basically, students create misinformation to learn the techniques of misinformation. It's a very engaging way for students to learn about the techniques used to mislead. And as far as like, if you want to take the course, it's at Massasoit Community College and it is open to anyone. That said, I am trying to work with the Center for Inquiry and their TIES program, or their Junior Skeptics program, to set up a course for teachers to be able to take it through and get professional development credit. So that might be an option. If you're interested, please contact me about that.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will just go through maybe 2 or 3 more question types, and I'll hand it over to Erin to share our other 2 STEM lessons. But I do want to say that in addition to the floater toolkit and Melanie's method of evaluating scientific claims, she gets into this idea of pseudoscience and its characteristics. And students are asked to actually match the floater element with the pseudoscience characteristic. And so here, again, another matching, and students have multiple tries to get it right. We then go into talking about alternative medicines and using evidence to support answers, which again is so important for our students. So students have an article that they look at, and then they have to give 3 reasons based on the information they read in the article. So Melanie does a great job of supporting educators as they work with students about evaluating science claims. Go ahead.
Victoria said this correlates so well with NGSS tests where students have to select multiple responses.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as a teacher, I hated doing test prep, and I love so much when it's naturally built into resources that are valuable for my students. And I'm not just spending, an hour going, let's do a practice test, right? So exposing students to those question types throughout the year really sets them up for success. All right, so let me stop sharing and I will hand it over to Erin.
Sounds great. So we're going to quickly examine 2 more of our STEM lessons, Be Health Informed and Making Sense of Data. So I'm just pulling up my screen so you all can see that. I love the assignment guides for a lot of reasons. One, it contains our vocabulary on the bottom right, and it has great learning objectives along with essential questions, which I used as an educator. But it gives a nice overview. So Be Health Informed is exactly as it says. Discover how to make sense of health and wellness information vying for our attention. And we know if we turn on the TV, if we scroll through our feed, there is plenty vying for our attention. So Be Health Informed is a wonderful lesson for our students to go through. And this is led by Dr. Melissa Clark. She's a former assistant dean of the Howard University College of Medicine. She's an emergency medicine physician, and now she's a CEO of the Be Health Empowered Group. So just as mentioned before, all of the lessons are taught by an expert, a professional expert. So Dr. Melissa Clark begins this lesson. You'll notice I'm starting chapter 3. I'm in element 17. This is about the scurvy experiment in modern medicine. And so I'm just going to let you listen to her for just a snippet since we're running short on time, but I would love for you to hear from our expert.
All branches of science, medicine is driven by evidence and rooted in testing. It's not driven by intuition. But it wasn't always that way, and there's a lot we can learn from this history. Let me show you what I mean. For a long time, medicine was unscientific. In fact, it was often based on superstition, traditions, and mystical beliefs. Let's jump back in time and look at an example from the 1700s. It was common back then for sailors to get scurvy.
Okay, sailors to get scurvy. Now, what's fascinating about this, and I love this example because I didn't know this to be true, that this is one of the first recorded controlled experiments that actually led to evidence-based medicine, where we now and then had a cure for sailors with scurvy. Does anybody know what that cure was? Out of curiosity, if you do, you can throw it in the chat.
Let's see if anybody knows here, Erin.
Dun, 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 dun.
Amy says limes, orange juice, maybe, vitamins.
There we go. There we go. Citrus.
Gin.
So,
Somebody put gin. Gin.
I love this group. So it was citrus, and but we only have that information because a doctor in the 1700s had an evidence-based controlled experiment where he was able to compare treatments and find which actually worked. And so I think that speaks to us now. Do we want to leave things to chance, or do we appreciate evidence-based medicine? Do we appreciate science, that science can lead us to draw conclusions, that research collected, data collected, controlled study groups gives us better information than we would have without? And so Dr. Clark goes on to develop this example, to break it down. We get academic language. We have great visuals, which all of our expert instructors include. So it's easy for students to learn and go through. But after this learning, students are able to identify the following characteristics of this. What would be an experiment that connects scurvy to modern medicine? But that is one example. And so as we continue with our learning, Dr. Mel, as she likes to be called, she goes into another example. And this example, as with all examples, really hit kids where they live. And what I mean is it connects to them. It's relevant. And I sincerely appreciate that about our learning that is designed. And so she talks about, in this lesson, information that a student may hear on TikTok, that they just hear someone talk about on TikTok, that if you study with classical music or you're working with classical music, that you're going to perform better. Well, that's great to hear that claim, but is it legitimate? And so Dr. Mel walks us through a study, how we could use two groups, where one group is studying and working with music, another group is not, and then we can compare, and how we can compare the samples. And she talks students through this learning. So not only would they be able to understand and think critically about research and data collected, but I also believe this would be an awesome springboard for students to go into their own research for their own controlled study groups for whatever a classroom may be working on. For the sake of time, I'm going to take us to making sense of data. Now, I love making sense of data. I was trying to hide my top. Oh, there it is, hide meeting controls. There we go. So making sense of data. Again, exactly as it sounds, explore how we create, interact with, and are influenced by data in all aspects of our lives. With all of our lessons, this isn't just a STEM thing. It's not just a literacy thing. This is a life thing. This is so imperative. All of this learning that's been discussed today, and even the learning from our other Checkology lessons, this is a life thing. And so important that we equip our students with the ability to, in this instance, make sense of data. Our expert for this is Cece Way. She's a data journalist. This visual as part of one of the learnings cracks me up, because how many times have you been asked a leading or loaded question in a survey to try to get us to a response? It's important that we have our discernment muscles in check so we can be aware when that happens. And so she talks through different ways to make sense of data, from discerning questions asked, to understanding margin of error, to understanding when data can be infallible or fallible. Which is it? Is data objective, even if it's generated from a computer? I mean, all of this great conceptual learning that happens during this lesson is powerful and would support any STEM class along with any ELA classroom. And so in closing, I just want you to hear from Cece Way, our expert, just for a moment. She's just finished teaching us about how we count, or how the average is calculated in a quick and efficient way. And she's talking about outliers right here. So just briefly, I'm going to hit play.
Outliers, or numbers way outside the range of the other numbers in the set. The mean isn't such a great representation of the middle. For example, check out this data set showing the annual income of 5 graduates of the geography program at the University of North Carolina.
My favorite. Okay. Geography graduates, geography, University of North Carolina. Obviously, the $130 million amount is the outlier. Does anybody have any guesses as to whose income that is? I will give you a hint. A famous basketball player. If no one knows, or any guesses can be shouted out is just fine. But
Connor already said Michael Jordan. Connor said Michael Jordan.
Yep, Michael Jordan. And
That
so,
was so quick.
was it? Oh, that's awesome. And so this example illustrates why we have to question when we hear average. We have to wonder what information is missing. And it's not about being paranoid. It's about healthy skepticism. It's just about knowing enough to know enough to ask enough, to wonder as we grow our students as creators of data, as researchers, as we grow them in their work in with this lesson, making sense of data. So as I stop sharing my screen, I just am going to briefly show you a formative assessment that's asked at the end. And then my favorite, it follows up with a justification. So, you know, they're varied in nature, and that is something that you can count on, that there are many ways to check in on student learning. I am going to close out. I am in love with these lessons, and I hope you are too, as you see their value, not only for STEM support, for literacy support, but really for life support.
Yes, thank you so much, Erin. And in closing, I just want to thank Melanie for joining us this evening to share her expertise with us. We are so grateful to you. And I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. We hope that you try some of our lessons. Please do not hesitate to use the Google document, which contains our contact information, to reach out to any of us. Should you experience any issues, we are happy to help you. And I do also want to
just at the end, I want to thank some of the other experts who advised us in our early research for this lesson. So thank you to Gail Sinatra, Doug Lombardi, and Andy Norman. We just are forever grateful for your help with this. And if there are any questions on the way out, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will hang around and answer them as we see them. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, Melanie. You will receive a follow-up email, not only with this fabulous webinar that you can share with all of your friends, but also the link that will not only direct you to Melanie's website, her Twitter profile to connect, but also everything that you saw here, of the assignment guides, as well as the new lessons. But we appreciate everyone joining us. Great job. I know, Brittany, thank you for spearheading this, our in-house science expert. Melanie, before we sign off, would love to pass it to you for any final words about the importance of your career, your profession, working with students in science.
Oh, wow. That's a major thing on the end here. Hey, thank you, first of all, for having me. I really appreciate this, and I really appreciate what you all are doing. Educating our students about the information landscape, including science-based claims, is one of the best things that we can do as educators, but it requires getting students to understand misinformation and the techniques used to mislead. And so we can't just rely on the old fact-based model. And so teaching students these skills is really essential.
Absolutely. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Have a very nice evening.